Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick. And on this episode of the podcast, we have Jason Birmingham, who's the Chief Technology Officer at Broadridge Financial Solutions. So, Jason actually joined Broadridge in 2019 to serve as the CTO for the company's global technology and operations segment. So, in this role, he leads engineering, quality assurance, and architecture globally across capital markets, wealth, and asset management. So, before joining Broadridge, Jason had an extensive career, including more than 12 years with Fannie Mae, where he served as the head of capital markets and finance. And for those of you that don't know, Broadridge Financial Solutions has provided the critical infrastructure that powers corporate governance, capital markets, wealth, and investment management. So it has kind of like a bird's eye view into kind of some of the most important things going on in finance and certainly in tech. So thanks for coming on the show, Jason.
Rick, Jack, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
A pleasure. Thanks.
And would you mind, so you studied finance, you began your career as a management consultant at PwC. Can you walk us through your career journey and how you got started there?
Yeah, happy to. Not always the most traditional, right, resume you read when you talk to a CTO, but I think it's one that's been a set of experiences that have benefited me well. So I've always been, really, really passionate about the markets in financial services. My undergrad and both my graduate degrees are in finance, right? So no tech there. And it just was fueled on the fact I love understanding how businesses work, how the markets function, how people make money. And it's just, even as a kid, I remember that was something I was just naturally drawn to. So that's kind of what got me into finance. And it wasn't until after I got through college and into the role at Pricewaterhouse, which I'm old enough that it actually was Pricewaterhouse at the time. It was before it was PwC. Unfortunately, I missed it by a year. It wasn't until that point, that I really started to connect the dots between, my passion of finance and, what was then an untapped passion around technology. So, I was at Pricewaterhouse, was always in a group that did financial services, large scale system implementations, transformation, big project type stuff. But I was always on the business side of those transformations. But it became clear to me pretty early on that the people that were driving those projects and the solutions and and ultimately a lot of the value were the technical people sitting across the table from us. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool. So maybe they weren't at the top of the org chart at that point in time, or they were a little bit in the background. They were the ones that when you were in the back room solutioning, they were the ones that were kind of connecting the business thoughts with a solution that could work from a tech perspective. And when I was there at PwC, it was cool. And that was the first time that a little light bulb went off. I said, hey, maybe I'm not totally where I need to be, in terms of a career vector. And, when I jumped over to Fannie Mae, which was, I guess in the early 2000s, that was where that spark finally, took off, or light bulb finally clicked for me. Came in, Fannie at that point in time was doing a tremendous amount of transformation. I was brought in to help lead a replatforming of all their finance capabilities. But, again, started on the business side, led that transformation, or at least large pieces of it. And, as we were wrapping that piece of work up, the person running technology at the time approached me and said, hey, great job. Would you be interested in running capital markets technology? And I said no. And I said no a bunch of times. They said, you're crazy. Like, I was pretty transparent. I was really transparent about the fact that I hadn't written a line of code. I did at PwC get into a lot of, SaaS modeling, which I don't even think is a thing anymore. But, I said, look, I appreciate it. Like, I'm quite flattered, but not the right fit for Jason. And, to his credit, and thankfully for me, he was persistent. And he was the first person that really started to talk to me about how the lines between business and tech are coming together. And again, this was almost 20 years ago at this point. And, it started to click, and he's like, I need somebody who can run tech as a business. And that was the first time I had heard that statement. And so he talked me into it. And I'm glad that he did, because it has been the perfect match for my passion, which is still the markets and finance. I still have books. There's a book sitting right next to me about technical trading. I just read it because I guess I'm kind of a nerd, but in tech, which is my other passion around kind of that transformation and driving change. And I love the before and the after stories. Tech is the thing that drives that. So, that kind of crystallized for me at Fannie. We did the finance replatform, and we ended up replatforming the entire front to back. So trading, the middle office, and finance. And it was a really cool experience for me. Just seeing all of it come together, and really just the number of systems that were retired, all of the business metrics that were just night and day different, kind of before and after the transformation. So that was cool. And you don't hear often that a CTO is working like 45 hours a week, playing a lot of golf. But it really was like, we had new tech, we had a new operating model, like everything that you'd ever want as a CTO, we had it, because we had just finished this transformation. And I got a call from Broadridge, and they said, hey, like, we've kind of been watching from afar, we've heard great things, like, come chat with us. And when I came in, I said, Broadridge, I was familiar with them obviously from working in the markets. I really at that point in time wasn't sure if that was the right career jump for me. And thankfully, the same mentor who talked to me about coming over and running capital markets at Fannie gave me some great advice about joining Broadridge. And so I made the decision to join Broadridge almost 4 years ago. And it's been a fantastic place for me. Just Broadridge is a place where, like Fannie, you have the power to convene a market. Broadridge is in every marketplace, globally. We do almost every product that you can imagine. So the canvas is immense in terms of, the change that you can drive and the impact that you can have, not only on a market, but, obviously on our customers. So that's been a great experience for me as well. But yeah, I guess getting back to your original question, not your traditional CV when it comes to a CTO, but I really think that the set of experiences I had between learning the markets and working in a firm like PwC really put me in a great spot to be where I'm at today.
So Jason, how do people look at you, let's say from a software engineer? Did they initially view you with skepticism, like, who's this guy telling me what to do? Or did they just look, hey, this is a smart guy, he has some really good experiences that's different than the talents I have, and let me hear him out and we could collaborate together?
Yeah, I would say a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to have built a reputation and really strong relationships with my business partners when I was on the business side. And so when I made the jump over to run capital markets, this was back at Fannie, I had people that were in my corner. I was a known quantity. I had proven myself, and there was generally support. That's not to say that there wasn't, a bunch of skepticism even within the people that I was now supporting, because obviously technology is an important part to their business, and they want to make sure that their business doesn't suffer because, this big head is sitting in the chair now. I would say as you get further down the stack, though, and the people that were career technologists, there definitely was a bit of a headwind there. And, I think part of it was reframing the conversation a little bit to say, hey, look, like, you're always going to be a better coder. You're always going to be smarter at a bunch of things other than me. But like, my job is different, right? My job is to really use technology to deliver business outcomes, right? And manage stakeholders and manage customers. And, think about things like architecture, which at that point in time were afterthoughts at, places like Fannie. So, there were people that definitely didn't think it was a great idea, but all you can do is like I said, try to reframe it and then just go show them. And it's like, at the end of the day, the results are the only thing that people really care about. And if you're delivering the outcomes and the results that people want, the naysayers either get on board or they tend to move on to other things where they can complain about other stuff. But no, it was I would say that the support model that I had, I was fortunate to have people that were in my corner, that were advocating for me, and look, helped me probably not make some really dumb decisions early on, which is the value of having a mentor. But yeah, no, it was I would say it was a mixed bag in terms of people pushing and pulling a little bit.
So when you say, just to talk about the mentor, because that's an important concept, and not many people have a mentor. So how did that work out? Like, did you seek that person out, or did they come to you and say, hey, I like the cut of your jib. I know I'm going to take you under my wing. How'd that play out?
You know, the person I'm talking about, I won't mention his name because I didn't have a chance to talk to him before. So, but no, we naturally hit it off, like same interests, similar background. Strangely enough, he's in his 60s now. He was a business guy that got into tech at big banks, like, you know, big roles at big banks. And, you know, he was kind of an archetype for that model. And I still kind of use him as my frame of reference in a lot of ways. But on mentorship, I learned that lesson the hard way when I was in management consulting. So, you know, when you're early on in your career, your reward system is get this thing done by 5 o'clock, and then, you know, we'll give you more. And like you get rewarded for doing. And, you know, so I embraced that wholeheartedly. And, you know, I was moving up the chain really quickly at PwC until I wasn't, right? And I got to the point where, you know, getting promoted was about other people saying that you should be promoted and pulling you up to the next level. And I hadn't built the relationships. I'd been so heads down on just deliver that it slowed me down for a couple of years until I could build authentic, real relationships. Not the, you know, hey, I need to get promoted, will you like advocate for me kind of conversation, but people who genuinely took an interest in my career and wanted to help me, and then gave me the right advice to navigate around the roadblock that I had created for myself. So, you know, it was in management consulting that I learned the value of having a mentor. And then, you know, as I, you know, progressed from the business side to the tech side, I go back to that well. I still go to that same person today. I have people now that mentor me with emerging tech. I have people that mentor me on management and leadership and that kind of stuff. You know, I've gotten people into my network now that I trust, and I know that they're looking out for me, right? I trust that they're looking out for me, so I can have a real conversation with them, and they still keep me from doing really dumb stuff sometimes. So I value that interaction with time.
Can we break that down a bit? Because I think this is a common realization that many kind of mid-level senior professionals have, right? Where they get to the stage where they've been focused on the tactical, the work, the projects, and they get to this point where they feel like they've hit this career roadblock, right? And that's when you get the criticisms of, oh, well, this place is just political. It's out to get me. It's not fair. I've been doing, you know, all this great work. Why can't I just keep accelerating on the career ladder like I've always been? Why have the rules changed? I mean, is there some truth to these criticisms, or is it like, is there necessarily a mind shift that needs to take place?
You look at politics exist everywhere, so I mean, there's certainly truth to that, right? But I really think that's almost a non-factor, honestly. Like, you know, I think owning your career, being accountable for your career, and understanding what it takes, because it changes. And that for me was the learning, is like success in what got me here today is not success for me tomorrow. And that's the thing that I don't think, it didn't click with me. I don't think it clicks, you know, with a lot of the people that are earlier in their careers that I see today. And so, yeah, does that feel like the world's against me, or does that feel like, you know, I'm being singled out? Yeah, I think it can, but that the learning is, you know, look, the first couple of years, here's what winning looks like. The next couple of years, right, it changes a bit. By the time you get, you know, to an executive, that's probably why I can be in a chair and be, I guess, relatively successful. I'm on your podcast, so it's got to mean something. You know, it's I spend 10% of my time on stuff I spent time on 20 years ago, if that, right? And I think understanding how your time, you know, if you think about a career from leadership skill, management skill, and functional skill, like early on, I was 110% on functional skill, and it was great. And missed out on, you know, maybe switching some of that energy into management skill, which would have been the next, you know, kind of jump for me in the career. And then obviously, as you move into the executive rank, it's all about leadership and strategy and vision and that kind of stuff. But, you know, that relative weighting shifts as you get through your career. And I think the sooner that somebody recognizes that, that's an easy thing to kind of take on board and move forward with.
That makes so much sense, because I think it's kind of drilled into people when you start working, you know, put your head down, you know, go above and beyond, and it's just like tunnel vision, do your job. And then time goes on. And like, as you're pointing out, Jason, you realize, wait a minute, I really didn't build a network. I didn't find a mentor. I didn't find sponsors. I was just doing my work, and that's good. But wait, they didn't tell me the full story. And like here, and this is what's great about these conversations, because it's like, yeah, doing a good job is really important, obviously. But if you're just like this Lone Ranger doing it and no one knows what you're doing and no one's looking out for you, it's really going to be hard to go to that next step, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was frustrating. I remember, you guys are taking me back a long time ago, but like I remember I was really frustrated watching people who I know didn't put the time and the hours in like I did, were getting promoted faster. I'm like, wait a second, like that's not fair.
Oh,
right?
wait, is these the people? Because Rick, I wonder if you come across this too. I would come across these people all the time. They would spend 80% of their time looking for a new job or self-promoting themselves and not really doing the job. I always wonder, like, what are you, like, you're going about your whole day, you're not really doing any work. You're just schmoozing the boss. I guess there has to be a fine line between 80% of just, schmoozing and trying to kind of look at me, look what I'm doing, and doing the work, right? You have to find that balance, I suppose.
There's a balance there. And look, I would say, for people who are saying that in their career now, like karma is a real thing, and it does eventually catch up with the people who aren't, well-rounded, right? So, people move at different speeds at different stages, but yeah, the people that were moving fast and continued to progress, right? Maybe didn't just make the next step and then got stuck there. Whereas I got stuck at the step before. The people that kept going, knew that balance, and they just figured out a lot sooner than I did the value of positive relationships and networking. And it's still today, like on my to-do list, it's sitting next to me. I have to make it to do for myself to pick up the phone and network and do that. It's just not something for me that comes naturally. So I treat it like it's a to-do. So, people are listening and looking for a piece of advice. That's pretty basic, but it keeps me honest, even, relatively deep into my career at this point, that if I don't do that, then I'm not going to reap the benefits when I need it.
Well, I would imagine, especially given your work where you're doing a lot of project management kind of stuff, you need to have those relationships, because let's say, you're dealing with Rick, who's, in finance, and, Jack is in tech, whatever. And if you're not cultivating that relationship and you need us, like, we may not jump when you call, because like, oh, wait, now you need us and you get in touch, but like, we haven't heard from you for, ever. Yep. So it's really important to keep that, keep everybody close and keep involved, but it takes work, right? It takes time and effort and work. And I wonder too, Jason, if like you put it as a to-do list, because sometimes it's like, I know I got to do it. It's like when I have to call like some relatives, right? Like older relatives. I feel I got to do it, but it's, you got to brace yourself for like a long phone call, and it's, yep. you got to just push it through and just, all right, I'm going to make that call. I'm going to do it. And then afterwards you feel better. I don't know about you guys, right? You feel better. Like, you know what? I did a good deed. I did a mitzvah. I feel better about myself. This is good. Everyone's happy. And yeah.
I guess it gets down to, what motivates you, right? There's the, hey, like, are they going to be there when I need them to be there? Which is a real dynamic, right? And you need to make sure that you're doing that, because when the chips are down, that's going to happen more than once. You do need people that are going to be there to help dig you out. I think the other piece of it too is just, especially as you start, getting into the executive ranks a little bit, you can't move anything forward without the right people moving it forward with you. And so getting people on board and keeping them on board and building those, I would say, coalitions, the consensus stuff, I think, is actually a negative, dynamic in some cultures, but the coalition, right, people that are aligned around an outcome and they want to drive it together with you, you're going to need to have that network and those trusting relationships built if you ever want to do anything that's, approaching strategic.
I appreciate that advice, right? Because it's so powerful to see someone at kind of your leadership level in your experience saying, like, I still need people to help lift me up even when I've reached this level, right? There's still things that I just don't know, because I think it's very easy, for those of us who aren't quite there yet where you are, to think like, oh, well, you're in that role because you necessarily know everything, right? Or like you've done it before, and that's why I should listen to you, or that's why you're in the role you are in now. Um, like when did that kind of moment of realization hit for you where you realized like, oh, like I'm in the C-suite and I still need people to lift me up?
It's funny, like I don't know that it has yet. Like, and
Okay.
maybe that's a healthy mindset. I don't know, or maybe I'm just like still 20 in my head. But no, it keeps me on my toes. I don't think that I've made it. And I think if you would ask any successful CEO or anybody else who's a step up the ranks, I suspect they would say the same thing, right? They think there's always something else to learn. There's always more mistakes to make. There's some dynamic that's changing that nobody's seen before, like COVID. I mean, COVID made or broke some people's careers, right, from a leadership perspective. So, I don't think I've made it. I know, I probably think of today how many things I've already screwed up, but there's freedom in that, right? I mean, I've come to embrace that as like that continuous improvement mindset of like, I'm going to, if I have a failure, as long as I learn from it and don't make the same mistake again, that's a positive thing. Actually, we talk a lot about that in software development, but I think just in career development, those kind of agile principles, right? Think about it the same way, is that, you're interacting with somebody who's in the C-suite, right, or a senior position, I wouldn't look at them that they know it all. You could certainly look at them as somebody who's made a ton of mistakes, but they've learned how to get better. They've encapsulated that learning in their playbook, and then they're better off for it. So yeah, I try to reinforce that with myself. It's always good to be aligned with yourself before you start talking to other people. But even when I'm out talking to the team, it's like, well, we're not. If anybody's telling you they got it all figured out, then I think they're probably a little off base.
I mean, as you've grown in your career, was there a promotion that was more difficult for you to earn, and how did you earn that?
The one where I had to learn the lesson when I was in my management consulting days about the network, that was hard. Like I still carry some of the emotional baggage from that, I'm sure. Because it forced me to really be honest about where I failed for the first time. Athletic growing up, I was competitive, I still am competitive, right? And I was used to winning, right? And if I didn't win, I knew what I had to do to win the next time. And it took me a while to win with that one. And it was good. It turned out, actually, I think was a blessing, right? Because it's a constant reminder for me of how important that stuff is. So look, that one was tough. I think another promotion that was tough, I think stepping into the promotion into the capital markets tech role was tough, right? But that was tough more from a functional perspective. I just had a lot to learn. I had a lot of very senior people that were now used to be partners or now stakeholders. We were in the midst of a transformation, so it wasn't kind of just run the bank, sort of keep the lights on sort of work. This was driving transformational change. So that one was tough just because I was in a new role and having to apply things I'm learning on the fly. So that was a different sort of challenge, but again, wouldn't trade that experience for the world. I still rely on those lessons from when I stepped into the capital markets technology chair at Fannie, that I use the same things day in, day out in this chair.
Jason, was it the challenge with PwC? Because with management consulting firms, from what I've seen, it's sometimes misportrayed to people because they think, okay, I'm a management consultant, but to get ahead, you have to really be a sales guy, a saleswoman to get clients. Is that kind of what you were bumping into? Realizing, hey, now I got to, because you were talking about segues before. That's another segue, right? Hey, I go in as a management consultant to come in there and give advice on XYZ, whatever you specialize in. But then they tap you on your shoulder. Wait, Jason, you got to kind of cultivate clients and you got to get business. Is that what you kind of refer that you kind of bumped into that?
Well, the challenge with the promotion was more internal, and I didn't have the right network internally to say, hey, Jason ought to be promoted to a manager or whatever the heck it was at that point in time. So that was internal. Strangely enough, being with customers and the management experience and the experience I got in general from management consulting. When I go and talk to people that are still in college and they're trying to figure out where they want to go, I said, look, if you have choices, I could never recommend against joining a management consulting firm, because you get to see a lot of different industries, depending on what project you're working on, a lot of different companies within industries, and so many different perspectives on how people approach running a business and solving problems. And it's just, I think for anybody at that point in their career, they're like a sponge, right? They're just like, how do we do this? Like, I didn't learn this in college. So how do people really do, whatever topic you're talking about? And so, that was really fantastic. And I loved being in front of clients just so I could listen. And I wasn't always speaking at that point in time, right? But I was in the room and I was just sucking it all in. And just, I remember I would write it down, like, here's how this person at this bank solved this problem. And then, if you ran across it again, I'd go back and I'd look at my notes. And it was just fascinating to see how everybody did the same thing kind of differently. And I got to pick and choose how I wanted to put my, toolkit together. So, that was cool. But in consulting, right, eventually you have to make the jump from doing the analysis to selling the deal. And that jump was less difficult for me. I was really comfortable in front of clients, and I'd learned the business, and back to what you're passionate about, right? It's always easy to be knowledgeable about things you care about. Just there was always a lot of very natural conversations, and the sales side of it actually came, relatively easy to me compared to some of the other aspects of
it. So that goes with what you've been saying. It's like I think we look at our career sometimes as this straight line, but there's always nuance and always changes and always having to be flexible, always having to learn something new, because it's ever changing. Otherwise, if not, you're just going to be stuck in place.
You're going to be stuck in place. And I will say, and it's so critical today in whatever role you're in. I learned it when I was a management consultant, was the concept of being customer centric. Like that, just if you learn anything, always put your customer first, because it's a great way to make sure that your objectives are aligned. And if you're doing something that benefits them, most likely you're not doing something that harms somebody else, right? And so it's been a good, skill for me. And obviously we're in a customer business at Broadridge, and very, very customer centric in terms of the culture here. And, that was, I think if you're in management consulting and you're trying to make that jump, learning how to be customer centric, it's a skill. It gets thrown around kind of ad nauseum these days, but there's a true skill to being customer centric and putting yourself in their shoes and understanding what value looks like from their perspective. And a lot of times, if you ask the question, what is truly valuable? Like, what would change the way their business operates as a definition of value? Wildly different than what you think it is, right? We certainly made the mistake in prior companies, and we try not to make it, here at Broadridge, but, trying to tell somebody else what's valuable to them, is a classic mistake. Because if you don't get in and understand how to ask them, and sometimes you have to coach somebody to help them understand what is value. They don't just be like, oh, value to me is whatever, and then there's an eloquent speech that comes out. That's a real skill to coach and kind of pull that information out, especially as a consultant, right? And then you turn that into a project that helps solve a problem. But even in software, right? Like, somebody says they want a feature in a given product. Well, do you? We could certainly build that. But what I think, understanding you as a customer and your business, is you might actually need something that looks more like this. And that is value, right? That's what people pay us for. And, if you do that well at any point in your career, kind of regardless of the discipline, you're always going to find that you're in high demand.
I love that context, right? Because you're exactly right. Everyone says they're customer focused or they want to be. And at the same time, we have a lot of professionals and a lot of businesses, frankly, that struggle with making an impact, right? And so they don't see that, well, necessarily like to serve someone, like you make an impact, right? You make their life easier, or you solve something that they either didn't know about or that they've been bugged for like, a million years. And now you've kind of unblocked something for them. And people aren't able to kind of connect that to.
Yeah, no, look, I think it's really important. And if you want to talk about, raving fans, to use that word, or repeat buyers, or, NPS scores, all the things that, people measure, try to measure this. If somebody remembers that you helped them in a way that was valuable to them, value in a general sense, like the phone just starts ringing. Like I knew that I was okay at being a consultant because I didn't have to sell the deal. The deals started coming to me, right? And I think, whether you're in any kind of sales role or not, it doesn't really matter, right? If you're in a software development company, work that you find interesting starts to gravitate to you. People start to recognize that you're a person who can solve problems and really frame the right problem. I think a lot of these things go off the rails at step one, which is what problem are we actually solving? People that are good at that and being customer centric, it's a skill, and it's really super valuable because now we're not going to waste time solving the wrong thing, and we're not going to build the wrong thing, God forbid, if we're talking about software, because that's an expensive mistake. But that, and you talk about how do you add value regardless of the discipline that you're in or the industry that you're in. That's pure gold.
As a CTO, in a way, it seems like you have to be customer centric internally to your counterparts, right? Because you need to look after them, you have to care for them, you have to figure out what's going to help them do a better job. So it's almost like they're your customers, almost more. I'm thinking it through. It's like almost more than being, a coworker or an employee. It's like you're their customer. You got to make them work. You got to find out, how am I going to make your life better, and to produce, be a better software designer, be whatever it might be a better marketing person, whatever the case may be. Right?
Yep. No, like everybody is a customer. And I think it's a great, and I didn't think about it that way. I'm going to take that if you don't mind, but it's a great mindset to operate from, right? Because, internally, in everywhere I've worked, right, the relationships between my colleagues has been the reason I've stayed. I'm not a job hopper, right? I tend to stay at places a long time. It's always because of the people and the relationships. And that's certainly the case here at Broadridge too. And so there's great partnership. The products and tech integration, always more to do in any company, but I'm really pleased with the progress we're making here at Broadridge about it. But it's that mindset that, this person's a colleague, but they're also a stakeholder, right? And what do they need from me or from tech for them to be successful? It's a good place to operate from, because, I think a lot of people, this is my job and I draw the boundaries around it, and then it hands off to this other person's job. And beyond the fact that that's like super inefficient, it doesn't create that positive outcome when you're talking about everybody's a stakeholder, you're talking about being customer centric, because you're focused on what you do as part of the broader machinery. And I just think there's a loss of opportunity there for everybody, not just yourself, right? Because you're just the person that sits in box number 7, right? Versus somebody who can play across the entire battlefield. So I don't know. I think it's a great way to think about it. I'm going to steal liberally from that.
It's all yours.
Thank you.
Just think about, how often do you see in different offices, right? And Rick, I don't think this was in your office, so that's hard for you on your side now. But when you're in different offices, there's the people who treat, without acknowledging, treating as customers, and others who bark orders, even if you're on the same level. You know what I mean? And then you get that conflict that brews, and this animosity that brews, and this toxic culture that brews, because like, why are you shouting me orders? We're on the same pier. Leave me alone. As opposed to just asking nicely. And some of these things are simple concepts, right? When you boil it down, just being a polite, nice, normal person goes a long way in making things happen. And particularly, it sounds like with your kind of job, because you're having like all these moving parts, and you got to make everybody happy, everybody successful working it. It's like you're juggling like chainsaws all day long to make sure everything is going smoothly, and everyone is right. It's an art.
There are days when it certainly feels like that. And look, I think it is an art, but I think it's really, I look at my job now is 110% leadership, right? And so, part of that is, how do I take out what I call operating friction from the day-to-day, environment that people have to get work done, right? At the end of the day, we're all here to get, work done. if I can take out the things that cause the friction between people or processes or whatever, that's a big part of my job today, right? And so, I think getting people aligned on the outcome that we need to achieve. We can talk more about outcomes because, if my team ever listens to this, they'll laugh because all I talk about is outcomes, right? Like, just think about what outcome we have to achieve, and then we'll figure out how we're going to achieve it versus trying to work within some predefined structure, which who knows if that structure is right on day one, right? So, I think being able to get people aligned on, hey, look, like, here are the things we need to achieve, here's the direction that we need to go. If people are aligned on that, there's a lot less, I won't say there's none, there's a lot less operating friction where you get the, I want to do this and you want to do that, and therefore we're at loggerheads. And I think that's at its core, that's what leadership is. And if you're somebody who aspires to be in that role, I think being able to influence people, argue in a positive way your viewpoint, right, and get people on board with the direction, that's a skill set that you can never start too early, right, developing, because it's hard. It's hard to learn it the later you get in your career. And, I'm okay at it, but there's certainly a lot of things that I could do a lot better with it as well. And so, I think if you aspire to be in an executive level management role, certainly in technology, because you are interfacing with every part of the company and customers. So right there, you have two stakeholder groups that don't always have aligned objectives, right? Publicly traded firm with shareholders that we need to support, customers who pay our bills. Like, those two things don't always line up. So how do you chart a course and a strategy that allows you to deliver what those groups need broadly and consistently, right? So neither of them is overly unhappy with you at any point in time.
I mean, I want to tap into that vein because I sense something rich there. Can you give us advice or even tell us how you learn to influence other people, whether that's like internally or, with your clients when you're at PwC and you're on a, consulting project? Because I find that it's very easy for professionals to kind of just throw their hands up and say, well, my work speaks for itself, right? You can tell that it's like such high quality, and that on its own should convince you, like, listen to me or go along, or like trust that, what I'm asking you to do or what we're all going to do together is the right thing to do or is the most impactful thing to do. But,
Yep.
as we all know, like, often that's not the case, right? So how do you build that skill, or how did you kind of start to train that muscle there?
You said the magic word in all of that, which is trust. So before you can influence anybody, they have to trust you. And then the next question is, well, how do you build that trust? and it comes down to two things: competence, right? Like, are you good at what your assigned job is at that point in time, right? And do you do what you said you were going to do? That's it, right? If you do those two things, then I trust you. And once somebody trusts you, then they're going to start to listen to you. And that's where the influence piece comes in. And, part of the other part when you get into the influence side of that discussion is being able to sit in their shoes, look at the issue or the topic from their perspective. What are their motivators? What are the things they're being asked to accomplish or do? The people that are weighing on them, like if you do like a network diagram, and you'll laugh, but I've done this before. I've drawn the picture. Stakeholder that I'm trying to influence, who's in their realm, right? Who's in their universe? What are the forces that are acting on that person? Well, then I need to understand what those forces are so that as I present my argument, again, in a positive way, I'm doing it in a way that implicitly helps them navigate the forces that are pushing on them. Because we all have forces and factors that push on us, right? In our daily jobs and our roles inside and outside of work. That's helping to form our perspective on a topic or, life in general, right? It's hard to influence somebody if you don't understand what it's like to sit on their side of the table. So, they got to trust me. They got to build that trust. That's not free. I got to continue to maintain that trust. That's really not free. But then after that, right, it's, putting the time in and honestly caring enough. I mean, there's a emotional aspect of this, right? I care enough about getting them to agree with me because it's the right thing to do. Like, that's where true influence, I think, comes from. So I mean, a little bit of a, sound like I'm on a therapist couch there, but like that, it's a very human, it's a very real thing to influence another person. So.
You know, I really understand now, right? Because I think it's very easy, like you said, to get really focused on, oh, well, like the tactical, like just showing that competence, just showing that functional awareness, that should be enough, right? But it's just the building block. Are there other building blocks that you suggest professionals should add to their toolkit sooner than later? Something that perhaps you wish that you had done sooner?
I think it's, and this is just my perspective, but I found it to generally be true. You know, thinking about your career in the three pillars, right? Functional, your skill that you're doing, the management side of things. So can you manage a budget? Can you put a project plan together? You know, that, but can you draw an org chart? Like those sorts of skills. And then the leadership pillar. You know, when you start out, you know, 100% of your time is on that functional, you know, what was I trained to do in college, which is, you know, largely probably not going to be that useful, right? You know, and that, then, you know, obviously making sure you get ahead of, you know, when are you going to need the skills in the next bucket? So as you progress, being a, you know, having that skill, you know, in your toolbox, and not just because you think it's there, because you've demonstrated that it's there before you need it, right? I think that's the other piece as people think about career management. Get ahead of the curve, know what success looks like in the next job that you want, or the next, you know, level that you want to get to, and go build demonstrable skill in that thing before you need it. And I think that's the other thing that people miss out is they get to the job, they want it, and then they realize that they've got 2 years of like skill building to do before they, you know, would be considered for the role. So look, I would say that. And then look, the last thing for me, I think, just as people go through the career, is just so much of this is about attitude and mindset, right? Like what's going on and how do you deal with setbacks, you know, and just that, to me, the people that really bust through and get to where they want to go. And that doesn't always mean the top, right? You know, being success isn't being at the top for everybody. For some people, it certainly is, and there's nothing wrong with that. Other people might be, you know, building the next big thing, you know, however you define success and whatever, you know, you would attach happiness to. Like, you know, you're going to have setbacks and hurdles and things that get in the way for you achieving that. How do you deal with it? Right. And that fall forward mindset, that continuous improvement mindset, that problem solving and continuous curiosity, like those are the things, regardless of whatever discipline you're in, that set people apart, right? And they get people to wherever they want to go. And I would say that the sooner that you figure that out and you feed that energy, you know, that is the intangible fuel. You could be the best engineer, you could be the best leader, be the best manager, be the best fill in the blank. If you don't have that intangible fuel, which lives between your two ears, you'll be good. You'll probably make a lot of money. You know, there'll be lots of positive things that come out of it, but you won't ever get to where you want to go. It's just, I couldn't be unconvinced of that, if that's even a word at this point.
I love those three pillars that you mentioned, right? Because it's very easy to focus on the functional, right? Like I do this job every single day. And then kind of throw your hands up and say, well, no one's given me the opportunity to be a manager in terms of being able to, you know, manage someone else or manage a budget or manage an org chart. But to your point, you can demonstrate leadership skills, right? And it doesn't matter the title, the tenure, the seniority, right? If you have that ability to influence others, to build that trust, you can demonstrate leadership. And with that, you know, you can build more functional skills. You can finally get that, you know, management opportunity, or even have a fast track to demonstrating it more quickly, right? In a perhaps non-traditional way. So I really appreciate that reminder, Jason. I like that framework.
Cool. I'm glad it's helpful.
Now, I know we're almost at the end of our show here, and I really like to make a habit of asking, is there anything that you think professionals really need to know sooner than later to level up your career? Any kind of like final, like last bits of wisdom that you can share with us?
Yeah, I would say never be afraid to ask for help. Right, like wherever I go, and Broadridge has been, I joined, 4 years ago. I guess it's been hard to believe it's gone that fast. Joining a new organization is great. Like, every time I've raised my hand, even to somebody who's senior and said, "Hey, look, can you help me?" To a person, they've never said no. Right. Same thing in my other stops in my career. It feels awkward. It's a vulnerable action to take. What do you mean you don't know the answer to whatever? But look, I think that's part of being authentic. I also think it's just a waste of time to try to figure everything else out yourself, right? There's people that are just better at stuff than you are, so why waste the time trying to figure it out?
Right.
But that would be, I guess, my kind of final piece of advice is just don't be afraid to ask. And then follow up, right? Whether it's a mentorship conversation or you're literally just asking for help, follow up, right? The person who gave you the help, most likely all they want to see is that you applied it and you're better off for it, right? Like that is, unless somebody is some foreboding sense of evil, like what most people enjoy is actually seeing somebody listen to them, take their advice on board and go do something great with it. And that's certainly been my experience. And, I would say that if folks are doing that in their career, they're probably going to be a step ahead.
But I love that. And I really appreciate that reminder, right? Where it's okay to ask someone and certainly admit that you don't have the right answers, and just benefit from other people's expertise and experiences. So I'm glad you gave us the opportunity to ask you for this advice. Thank you, Jason, for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jason.
Rick, Jack, thanks
Excellent.
for having me. It's a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure.